I didn't wake up that morning planning to tear down a dam with an excavator. But when someone cuts off your water out here, that's not just inconvenience. That's survival. That's your livelihood. That's years of work drying up in real time. And yeah, maybe I sound dramatic, but spend one summer in high desert ranch country and you'll get it real quick. Water isn't a resource out here. It's the resource. So let me set this straight. My place sits on about 200 acres of scrubby, stubborn land in southeastern Oregon, the kind of land that only works if you understand it, respect it, and most importantly, don't mess with the one creek that keeps it alive. That creek runs year-round, fed by a cold spring up in the hills, and legally speaking, this part matters. It belongs to me. Not in the I own the water molecules kind of way, but in the only way that counts out west, priority rights, dating back to 1946, which basically means when things get dry, and they always do. I'm first in line, everyone else waits their turn. Simple, clean, respected for decades. For almost 30 years, nobody challenged that, nobody tested it, because folks around here understood one thing. You don't start water fights unless you're ready to lose something you can't replace. Enter Caleb and Nora Whitaker. Portland transplants, mid-30s, the kind of couple that shows up with brand new boots and a 5-year plan to reconnect with the land. They bought the upstream parcel, paid cash, renovated the old cabin into what they called a regenerative living retreat. And within weeks they were talking about ecosystems, water capture, sustainability. All the buzzwords, none of the lived experience. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-change. I'm not anti-city folks moving out here either, but there's a difference between learning the land and trying to redesign it like it's a backyard project. First time I met Caleb was by the fence line. He had that friendly, slightly rehearsed smile, like he'd practiced being neighborly in the mirror. I told him straight up, no attitude, just facts. That creek running through your place feeds mine. I've got senior rights on it. Always have. He nodded, said all the right things. Of course, man, we respect that. We're all about coexistence. And I remember thinking, all right, maybe this won't be a problem. Yeah, that lasted about 8 weeks. It started subtle, water troughs taking longer to fill, the creek running quieter, thinner. You notice these things when your entire operation depends on them. At first I thought maybe it was seasonal shift, maybe upstream debris, but something felt off. So I rode up the line one afternoon, following the creek toward their property, and about half a mile in, I hear it before I see it. Nothing. No movement, no flow. Just this eerie stillness where there should have been sound. Then I round the bend, and there it is, a dam. Not a little pile of rocks. Not some temporary blockage. No, this was a full-on earthen dam, maybe 10 or 12 feet high. Packed tight. Engineered enough to hold back everything that should have been flowing down to me. Behind it, a growing pond. Calm, reflective, probably beautiful if you didn't know what it was costing someone downstream. I just stood there for a minute, hands on my hips, trying to process the level of audacity it takes to do something like that without even a conversation. Then I climbed up the slope, crossed into their yard, and Caleb's out on his deck like it's just another afternoon, sipping something cold, admiring his little man-made lake. I didn't yell, didn't storm in. I kept it real simple. You built a dam on that creek. He looks at me, shrugs, like we're discussing landscaping choices. Yeah. We're creating a habitat. It'll benefit the land overall. And I swear, it took everything in me not to laugh at how casually he said that. That water doesn't stop at your property, I told him. It feeds mine. And legally, I've got first claim on it. He leans on the railing, still calm, almost amused. It's still flowing through, just slower. We're just holding some of it back for the ecosystem. And that's when I realized. This wasn't ignorance. This was confidence. Misplaced, dangerous confidence. That's not how it works, I said, a little sharper now. You can't impound water upstream when someone downstream holds senior rights. And he hits me with this line, like he's been waiting to use it. We consulted with someone, and we're within our rights for reasonable use. Reasonable use. I almost smiled at that, because that phrase right there, that's the kind of half-understood legal jargon people cling to when they think they've found a loophole. But out here, reasonable doesn't override senior. I left that conversation knowing 2 things. 1, he wasn't taking this seriously, and 2, I was about to have to. By the time I got back to my place, the situation had already started biting. My lower pasture was drying, the grass losing that deep green, cattle clustering around troughs that weren't refilling fast enough. You can see stress in livestock before it shows up in numbers, and it's not a good feeling. Watching animals depend on you while something upstream is choking off what they need. That night, I barely slept, running scenarios in my head, replaying his tone, that casual shrug, that quiet arrogance of someone who thinks they've outsmarted a system they don't fully understand. And underneath all that, something else. This wasn't just about water anymore. This was about control. About someone new deciding they could reshape the rules because they didn't like how things worked before they got here. Next morning, I made up my mind. I wasn't arguing philosophy. I wasn't debating sustainability buzzwords. I was going to the one place that actually matters in situations like this, the county water office. Because out here, you don't win water disputes with opinions, you win them with records, dates, and priority numbers stamped decades before either of us were even born. And if Caleb thought his little pond project was protected by some vague idea of reasonable use, well, he was about to find out just how unreasonable reality can get. Now let me pause the story right here for a second, because this is where a lot of people, especially folks new to rural land, completely misunderstand how this works. And honestly, Caleb wasn't unique in that. He just happened to learn the hard way. According to standard procedure in most Western states, water isn't tied to land ownership the way people think. It's governed by something called prior appropriation, which basically means first in time, first in right. So if someone like me has a documented claim from the 1940s, that's not just a nice historical footnote. That's legal priority over anyone who comes later, no matter how good their intentions sound. From a legal perspective, what Caleb did, building a dam that reduced downstream flow by that much, falls under what's called impairment. And that's a big deal. You're not just using water, you're actively interfering with someone else's right to use it. And here's where it gets interesting. This is a psychological trap a lot of people fall into when they move into unfamiliar systems. They assume modern ideas like sustainability or conservation automatically override older frameworks. But law doesn't work on vibes. It works on precedents, documentation, and impact. The lesson here is simple, even if it's not always intuitive. Intent doesn't matter nearly as much as consequence when you're dealing with regulated resources like water. So yeah, after that little reality check, I didn't waste time. I drove straight into town, dust still on my boots, and went to see the county water master. Except in this version of the story, his name wasn't Frank. It was Dale Mercer. Guy's been doing this job longer than I've owned my land. The kind of man who doesn't raise his voice because he never needs to. I walked into his office, told him what I'd seen, and before I even finished, he was already pulling records, flipping through files like he'd done this exact dance 100 times before. "What year's your priority?" he asks without looking up, and I go, 1946, and he pauses, just slightly, then nods, like he already knows how this is going to end. "That's senior to pretty much everyone in that watershed," he says, finally meeting my eyes. "If what you're telling me is accurate, he's in violation." That word, violation, it lands different when it comes from someone like Dale, because now it's not a disagreement between neighbors, it's an official problem. Next morning, we ride out together. He brings his measuring equipment, takes flow readings upstream and downstream, checks diversion points, does everything by the book, and the numbers don't lie. The flow hitting my property is down nearly 70%. 70? That's not reasonable use. That's choking the system. Dale stands there for a moment, hands on his hips, looking at that dam like it personally offended him. Then he just shakes his head. No permit, no authorization, and clear impairment. He mutters, already pulling out paperwork. By that afternoon, Caleb gets hit with a formal notice of violation. 14 days to remove the obstruction and restore natural flow. 14 days to fix a problem that should have never existed in the first place. Now here's where things could have ended quietly. If Caleb had any sense, he would have taken that notice, grabbed a shovel, or better yet, hired someone, and undone the damage before it escalated. But remember what I said earlier? This wasn't ignorance anymore. This was confidence, and confidence like that doesn't fold easily. Instead of fixing it, he doubled down, hired an attorney, started talking about environmental benefits, wildlife habitat, even tried to argue that his pond improved the ecosystem overall, like somehow that cancels out the fact that he was draining mine. And suddenly, What should have been a straightforward compliance issue turned into a legal standoff. That's when I brought in my own help. Her name was Denise Halpern, and if you've spent any time around water disputes in this state, you've heard that name. She's sharp, doesn't waste words, and she's been through enough of these cases to spot nonsense from a mile away. I handed her everything, my records, Dale's measurements, the violation notice, and she goes quiet for a minute, flipping through pages, then looks up and says, "This is clean. You've got senior rights, documented impairment, and a non-compliant upstream user. We're not negotiating, we're filing." No hesitation, no hedging, just action. Within days, she files for an emergency injunction, pushes it through fast track because of the ongoing damage, and suddenly Caleb's little, sustainable retreat is staring down a court date instead of a sunset reflection on his pond. Meanwhile, back on my land, things weren't getting better. Grass turning brittle, dust kicking up where there should have been moisture, and my cattle. Man, that's the part that sticks with you. They start clustering tighter, drinking slower, like they know something's wrong but don't understand what. I had to start hauling water in, truckloads of it, which is about as inefficient and expensive as it sounds, just to keep everything from collapsing. And every time I wrote another check for that, all I could think about was that still, quiet pond sitting upstream, full of water that legally and practically should have been flowing down to me. I ran into Caleb once during that stretch at the edge of the property line, and he actually had the nerve to tell me, "You might want to adapt. This is kind of the new normal." And I just looked at him for a second, trying to figure out if he actually believed that, or if he was just saying it out loud hoping it would become true. I didn't argue, didn't snap back. I just said, "We'll see what the judge thinks of your new normal," and walked away. Court day came faster than I expected. Small county courtroom. Nothing fancy, but heavy in that quiet, serious way these places get when real decisions are about to be made. And the judge, Judge Eleanor Briggs in this version. She wasn't someone you could bluff your way around. Grew up on a ranch herself. Understood water not as an abstract concept, but as something tied directly to survival. Denise laid it out clean. Priority rights from 1946, documented reduction in flow, official violation notice ignored. No theatrics, just facts lined up one after another like fence posts. Caleb's attorney tried to push back, leaned hard on environmental angles, talked about habitat creation, sustainability, community benefit, all the buzzwords dressed up in legal language. But here's the thing, none of that addressed the core issue, which was impairment of a senior right, and you could see it in the judge's face. She wasn't buying it. When she finally spoke, the room went quiet in that way that tells you something definitive is coming. The plaintiff holds senior water rights with priority dating back to 1946, she said, voice steady, controlled. The defendant's actions constitute a clear and unlawful impairment of those rights. No ambiguity, no wiggle room. Then she dropped the part that really mattered. The defendant is ordered to remove the obstruction and restore natural flow within 21 days. Failure to comply will authorize the plaintiff to take corrective action at the defendant's expense. And just like that, the clock started ticking. 21 days sounds like a long time when you're sitting in a courtroom, out in the field, watching your land dry out. It goes by real fast. I kept expecting, maybe even hoping, that Caleb would come to his senses, that he'd look at the ruling, do the math, and realize this wasn't a fight he could win. But day after day, nothing changed. The dam stayed, the pond stayed full, and the creek on my side stayed thin and struggling. By day 20, I knew exactly how this was going to play out. Day 21 came and went, no movement. So on day 22, I made a call. Tony Reyes, best equipment operator in the county. Guy's got that calm, no-nonsense demeanor you want when you're about to do something big and irreversible. I told him what I needed. He didn't ask a lot of questions, just said, "I'll bring the excavator." Denise came too, clipboard in hand, documenting everything, making sure every step we took stayed within the bounds of that court order. I notified the sheriff's office, gave Dale a heads up, because the last thing I wanted was this turning into some kind of misunderstanding. This wasn't revenge, it was enforcement. We rolled up mid-morning, engine rumbling, that heavy, mechanical presence cutting through the quiet of Caleb's carefully curated retreat, and for a second, everything just paused. The pond, the trees, even the air felt like it was holding its breath. Tony positioned the excavator, lowered the arm, and looked over at me. I gave him a nod, and that was it. First bite into the dam, clean, decisive. The packed earth gave way easier than you'd think, like it was never meant to hold something that powerful back. Second pass, deeper. Then suddenly, a crack, a shift, and you could hear it. The low, building roar of water remembering where it was supposed to go. And then it happened. The wall broke. Water surged through, not violently, but with purpose, like it had been waiting for permission. It poured down the channel, cutting through the obstruction, reclaiming its path, and within minutes, that quiet pond turned into a draining basin, and downstream, my downstream, you could almost feel the land breathing again. The creek filled out, widened, found its rhythm. It wasn't just water coming back, it was balance being restored. Of course, that's when Caleb and Nora showed up, yelling, panicked, accusing us of destroying their property, their ecosystem, their vision. Caleb's face was red, voice sharp. You can't just do this. And I didn't raise my voice, didn't match his energy. I just handed him a copy of the court order. Actually, I said, I can. Denise stepped in, calm as ever, explaining the enforcement clause, the missed deadline, the legal authority behind every move we'd just made. Nora started crying, talking about the fish they planned to introduce, the habitat they'd built. And yeah, for a split second, I felt something. Maybe not sympathy, but recognition, because I knew what it felt like to watch something you invested in fall apart. But then I thought about my cattle, standing over dry troughs, about the money spent hauling water, about the weeks of stress that never should have happened. And that feeling passed real quick. They tried to fight it afterward, filed a claim against me, against Denise, even tried to argue damages for the loss of their pond. But that didn't go far. Judge Briggs shut it down almost immediately, citing the prior ruling, the missed compliance window, and the clear authority granted for enforcement. Then came the part Caleb probably didn't see coming. He wasn't just losing his pond, he was paying for everything, my legal fees, the excavation work, the cost of hauling water, down to the last dollar. And if that wasn't enough, the state environmental agency got involved, did their own investigation, and fined him for building an unpermitted dam in the first place, ordered full restoration, and made it very clear, no rebuilding, no second attempt. And just like that, it was over. The pond was gone, the creek was flowing, and the lesson, well, that part was just beginning to sink in. So yeah, that's how it ended. No dramatic showdown, no last-minute compromise, just a quiet kind of finality. Water flowing where it's supposed to, land slowly healing, and two people upstream staring at the consequences of a decision they thought was harmless, or maybe even noble. And here's the thing. I've replayed that whole situation more times than I can count, not because I regret what I did, but because I keep asking myself the same question. How does something like this even happen in the first place? Like, how do smart, well-educated people walk straight into a conflict that was this predictable, this avoidable, and still act surprised when it blows up in their face? The answer's not as simple as they were wrong and I was right. It goes deeper than that. The lesson here is, people don't just make bad decisions, they build entire belief systems that make those decisions feel justified. Caleb didn't wake up one morning thinking, I'm gonna break the law and mess with someone's livelihood. No. In his mind, he was improving the land, creating something sustainable, maybe even doing the right thing. And that's exactly what made it dangerous. This is a psychological trap we see all the time. When someone believes they're operating on a higher moral ground, they stop questioning whether they're actually crossing a line. They start filtering reality through intention instead of impact. And out here, or honestly, anywhere law and shared resources are involved, that's where things go sideways fast. From a legal perspective, this whole situation is almost textbook. You've got a clearly established priority right, a measurable impairment, a failure to comply with a formal notice, and then enforcement backed by a court order. It's not complicated, it just feels complicated when emotions and personal beliefs get layered on top of it. According to standard procedure, none of what happened should have escalated the way it did. The system actually worked exactly as designed. The warning was issued, the timeline was given, the ruling was clear, the only breakdown was human behavior. That moment where someone decides, I know better than the framework I'm operating in. And look, I get it. Especially for folks coming from cities or different backgrounds. Rural systems can feel outdated, rigid, even unfair at first glance. You see a stream, you think, why can't I just use some of that water on my own land? And on a surface level, that sounds reasonable, until you realize that every drop of that water is already accounted for, legally and practically, often decades before you ever arrived. It's not about ownership, it's about allocation, and when you disrupt that, you're not just tweaking a system, you're destabilizing everything downstream, sometimes literally. The lesson here is, respect the system before you try to change it. Not because it's perfect, it's not, but because it exists for a reason, usually one that's been tested through conflict, failure, and real-world consequences. The kind of consequences that don't show up in theory, only in practice. And there's another layer to this, too. Something a little more uncomfortable: pride. Because if I'm being honest, part of why this went as far as it did wasn't just Caleb's misunderstanding. It was his unwillingness to back down once he realized he might be wrong. And that's human, right? Nobody likes admitting they made a costly mistake, especially not when that mistake is sitting in your backyard, filled with water, reflecting all the effort you put into it. But the longer you hold on to that pride, the more expensive it gets, financially, legally, and sometimes reputationally, and in this case, all three. I'll say this, though, I don't hate the guy, never did. Frustrated? Yeah. Tired? Definitely. But hate, no. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't about personal enemies. It was about boundaries, legal, physical, and frankly, psychological. Knowing where your vision for something ends and someone else's rights begin. And if you take anything from this story, let it be this: before you invest time, money, or identity into a project that affects shared resources, ask questions, talk to the people around you. Check the rules that were in place long before you showed up. Because once you cross that line, even with the best intentions, the system isn't going to care how good your idea sounded. It's going to respond to what you actually did. So now I'll throw it to you. What would you have done in my position? Would you have waited longer, tried to negotiate again, maybe compromised? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Followed the process, let the law decide, and then enforced it when the time came? And on the flip side, if you were Caleb, at what point do you step back and say, all right, I got this wrong? Because that moment, that exact moment, is usually where the entire story changes.